Do know who you are. I realize that a lot of it is the narrative that's the overachiever. It's like, I need to do this, so that I can be loved, be accepted. And fundamentally, it's like accepting myself in that frame. And I think that's the key thing with searching for your own leadership inside, is what is the best relative to that definition of yourself? Are you actually brave enough to ask?
Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Lisa Tong, an ex-consultant, corporate strategist, and engineer turned entrepreneur, researcher, author, coach, and facilitator. Lisa founded the projects called Me and The Leader as a Coach, both of which leverage data to think about your thinking and systemically train the power of words in conversation. And those are just a few of the many projects she's been able to launch. So given her wealth of experience, I'm excited to have her share her insights with you. Well, welcome, Lisa. Can you share with us a story that has shaped how you lead yourself or others?
Yeah, so I think the big one that's connected to the power of words is really how other people's words have shaped my experience. And then I began to realize that those words aren't me. I made an agreement really early on that they were me. But as I evolved, the leader within actually is like, no. Those words aren't mine, right? Of course, that's just a concept in itself, but it applies to so many parts of my life, right? My marriage, my career, what I perceive myself to be, and who I am, right? And so I think that's the bigger question. We're like, who am I? And that's where the thinking of my thinking and the words that I agreed to own weren't mine. And I think that shift really just allowed me to say, whoa, wait a minute. What's going on with my life? So I think that's really the start of that story there.
I'm going to double click into the part where you said, I started to realize that those words aren't mine or mine to own, right? What allowed you to be like, wait a minute, if I'm an autopilot, by default, I own those. So what shifted for you to be like, let's have a little bit more awareness around this piece?
I think there's a piece, and this is just my own methodology of how I'm sense checking, is there's a part that the head exists in and then a part that the heart exists in. And that's kind of how I delineate the two. And so the heart started having like more voice, right? And being more powerful and feeling and really allowing myself to feel myself rather than think of myself as an identity. And that became more stronger, more powerful. And that just evolves over time as I become more comfortable with who I am and who I want to be. And so it gets to a point where it's like the heart or the head, they're arguing with each other. And we as normal human beings, when I'm coaching people, I see the two sides arguing with themselves. It's fascinating. And so it's really a tipping point where I'm like, oh, stop head, right? Like, that's enough. That's really what made me realize is like, okay, who do I want to follow?
To be able to sit with yourself and actually have no judgment around the thoughts that come into your head, but also not let it control you and lean towards the heart piece, that's freaking hard. Based on your journey and what you've noticed when coaching others, what is a theme you've noticed that has helped folks lean more into the heart piece instead of defaulting to the head piece?
So a very simple exercise that I do give a lot of people is to just time box 15 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever that works for you, to say the heart's going to fully own the space. The heart's going to show up completely with no head interruption. And so that's a really simple exercise to just start with. It doesn't mean you need to action on it, but it means to give it the space for you to look at it in totality, honor it, right? And so time box it. You could draw, you could type it out, you could speak to yourself, whatever that channel is, dedicate that time to say, I'm going to own the heart to exist fully and not judge it. And so you talk about judgment. It's because one part's judging the other part. And so can we create a judge-free space intentionally, right? That's probably something to start with.
I don't know if you've ever been in conversation with people where through their words are usually like, I think, I notice, like there's nothing around the feels part. So the moment you're like, okay, sit down and go through this heart exercise, you're like, what the heck does that actually feel or look like? So for those, again, who is usually very in their minds, how do you even begin to help them be like, this is how you can effectively leverage this 10 to 15 minute block?
Whatever just comes to mind, just set the intention that I'm going to show up as me right now in the moment, whoever that is, right? Because by saying, oh, I shouldn't use these words, that's already a form of judgment in itself. So should, could, and would are actually judgment verbs. And so part of that is just to say, doesn't matter. Whoever shows up, doesn't matter. And then we can figure it out later afterwards, right? When you reevaluate it. But the point is just show up.
Fully appreciate that. And I'm going to lean into the leader within. Because you've worked with some reputable global companies, you've had multiple entrepreneurial endeavors this last couple of years, and you finish an Ironman. So how do you effectively lead the leader within so that you can perform at your best, but also prioritize your well-being?
Can I go on a bit of a controversial reverse statement? What is your best? What is my best, right? What is my best at what moment? And I think that's actually where I want to challenge people to think first. And so after all this reflection of everything I'm doing, on paper, yeah, it looks great. However, the deep down what's my best change over time. And so now at my best today, even for the next future, is what was I doing those things to serve? Who was I serving in those things? And I realized that a lot of it is the narrative that's the overachiever. It's like, I need to do this so that I can be loved, be accepted. And fundamentally, it's like accepting myself in that frame. And so the best actually is redefined. I think that's the key thing with searching for your own leadership inside is what is the best relative to that definition of yourself. Do you know? Are you actually brave enough to ask?
That's a beautiful call out there. And where I'm going to lean into is when you talked about accepting yourself, especially growing up for myself in an ethnic background and just a very outcome driven community. I noticed that a lot of my acceptance of myself comes from what I've been able to achieve. And you know, the ironic thing is that my parents have never, ever said, I love you because you did X, Y, and Z. They said that I love you in spite of whatever, right? So, but somehow society then shapes this frame of thought. So I'm curious for you, what has allowed you to truly accept who you are, understanding that there's going to be moments where you might teeter back to the other side?
I think I'm still on the journey, to be honest. I think it's a lifelong journey. But part of it is releasing identity connected to those achievements, right? I mean, a big one now is like, all right, are my kids successful? A lot of people ask, are your kids in university? How do I answer if they're not, let's say, right? And I feel a little bit of shame even sometimes like about, when they're not quite in university or the program that they're in. Like that dichotomy, it still exists and I feel it and it's just continuous. Even quitting my job last year, about a year and a half ago, I still struggle with how do I introduce myself, right? When I say, hey, Angela, hey, what do you do? What do you say, right? What do I say? I don't know, right? And so I think I'm still realizing I'm still challenged with accepting myself, but it's a journey. And I don't think it's something that happens overnight, 5 years. It could be a long time because, like you said, we've grown up as ethnic Asians with this almost unspoken expectation that the achievements define you. And you said it, your parents don't ask necessarily outright, but I think there's like so subtle things culturally that generationally as well that we kind of forget exists.
For sure. The part that you were alluding to in terms of, hey, it's actually contextual. Like you said, whether it's the example of your kids or maybe you're just in a different part of your entrepreneurial journey, there's probably going to always be that moment that it teeters into, wait, like I just tied my identity into that. So are there any guiding principles or questions that you pose for yourself in those moments where you start defaulting to what is potentially expected of you instead of what it is, the narrative that you ultimately want to create?
I think the most common thing is to sit with being uncomfortable trying to answer those questions. And when I realize I can't answer it like authentically, my heart versus the head, what I should feel. So there's a tool that I like to share with people is it's called the circuit breaker. And the idea is just to sit with whatever, count to like 1, 2, 3, and just sit with it. And then you'll start to feel like the multiple sides of you that are in conflict. And some of the really interesting things to be pulsing for that I personally pulse for is like, is my answer coming from a place of ego, right? So I try to do ego checks as well. Like if I'm going to react, is it out of anger, spite, ego, those feelings? And then I'll realize, it's a very headspace response. And then the other check is to ask, is this authentically my intuition? And so those are the 2 checks that I usually ask. Ego, me. And it's just 2 words. And I'll just say, if something comes into me, how am I receiving it? Circuit break and say, is it an ego thing that I want to react to? And then how much is it my gut that it's me, right? So those are the tools that I've developed lately that have been serving me really well.
I appreciate you sharing those tools because I was actually listening to a podcast recently. It was with young Pablo. I don't know if you've ever heard of that author before. Oh my gosh! Okay,
Yeah, for sure.
he's probably one of the books he's most well known for is Lighter. And he talks a lot about his path from addiction to wherever it may be. And he said, you know what? As I learned to overcome it, I realized most people can't actually sit with those uncomfortable feelings or sit
Yeah.
with themselves. So as you were talking about that, it made me think about that.
Yeah.
And speaking of discomfort, I want to tap into your experience finishing an Ironman. That is no easy feat at all. If anything, it's a
Oh,
combination of physical and mental fuckery along the way.
totally.
So for you, what was one of the biggest lessons you took away from your journey as you prepared for that Ironman and then finished it?
So the biggest lesson for me was the amount of commitment it takes to get there comfortably. A lot of people can say, yes, you can do it physically at the very end. It's going to be painful, but in what state do you want to finish in? And also, why am I doing it? At the beginning, it's everyone's doing it, let's do it together. But fundamentally, it's really, so maybe the learning didn't come during. There was learning for sure, going through the process. For those who are curious, my commitment at the time was about 20 hours of training a week. That's on top of having a full-time job and family, right? So it is a very big commitment. And communicating to people that I'm committed to this endeavor. It's going to take this much resources and time. Please support me, kind of thing. But I think at the very end, it's repeating, do I want to do it another one, right? And I do realize at the very end, I kind of did it for that achievement that I talk about. Look at me, I've done something here. And at the end is, would I do another one? Probably not. Right? And so the learning there is like, experience is good. Living something is good. At the very end, though, it's how many times you need to live something for the same reason. It's something to think about, right? So why we do the things that we do.
It's because you made a commitment to yourself where like, I'm going to train roughly 20 hours a week to prepare. And in those moments, you're like, F it, everything hurts. I feel tired after work. I need to commit to X, Y, Z instead. Yeah. How did you effectively lead the leader within so that you would follow through with what made sense for you to commit to in that context?
So I'm going to take a bit of a spin here, is that I'm very masculine in my energy. Most Ironmen, most people who do those type of endurance sports are like type A, go-getter personalities. And so that was me really embracing my masculine energy. I'm really good at that. Planning, executing, you have a commitment, outcomes, do it, right? It's something that I can do, kind of push it on my kids really early on. The thing that was imbalanced was my feminine, embracing the part that was like the leader within, which is the piece that actually I'm too much in my masculine in that sense. And I think that's really what allowed me to finish, because it was just like, do it. You committed, then you do it. But then there's a piece that I lose out on. And part of that, there is reflection, obviously, in going through the masculine, and that the body's there, but you still push through. It hurts, but you still push through, right? You're crying, but you still push through. And a lot of emotions in dark places within that space, but it's still very masculine energy showing up, right? And so that's my learning too at the very end, is that's just how I show my energy, and we all show differently. I just now in my life leaning towards a different type of energy.
For those who've never paid attention to the whole concept of masculine or feminine energy, I want to tap into that a little bit, because similar to you, I actually default to my masculine energy. Even when I look at my hobbies, martial arts, strength training, and like preparing for competitions and stuff like that, you are in your masculine energy a lot of those times.
Yep.
And I realize though, when I'm in that state for a majority of the time, whether it's in my work plus my business plus martial arts, it probably hinders me in many ways. And I'm still trying to figure out how to tap into that feminine energy a little bit more. Maybe the podcasting and the creative outlet is part of it, but it's actually really difficult for me. So I'm curious for you, how have you learned to introduce that a little bit more into your life?
The easiest one right now for me is two things. They're connected. One is, when you have a feeling, sit with it and let it fully emerge. So one of them is, unfortunate, well, obviously I'm judging when I say that now, is crying. Like crying in public, crying in front of your parents, crying in front of my kids, crying at work. That's feminine energy showing up where you're not judging. Can we do that? right? Can you give, so start with the small ones, right? Like cry at home alone, all of it. And I think I like to cry more now, maybe because it was like suppressed before. Like I just never let those emotions out. So that's the feminine side really coming through. Give it the space. And then as you begin to really show and cry in front of other people, it's more the vulnerable feminine space that says, I'm here. Can you hold the space for me? Can you be there for me? Because masculine energy will not ask that. So that's something to sit with.
Thank you for sharing that. I definitely know it feels like this cleansing feeling once in a while where tears just coming out, whether it's because I'm watching a TV show and like I feel the emotions of whatever is going on in that scene, or it's literally like I'm just so freaking frustrated and I don't take my anger out by yelling most of the time. It's through just like tears. I'm like, okay, I'm good again. Which
Yeah.
I totally hear that piece. So I want to switch gears now to when it comes to your leadership journey, because we've talked a little bit about habits and not defaulting, right? And having more awareness around it. What is the most difficult habit that you've had to unlearn as a leader so that you can lead, whether it's yourself or your team, more effectively?
I'm going to judge myself when I say this because I sense it. It's really funny that as we're speaking, I can feel some discomfort about how I answer. And normal corporate leaders might say, what? I'm going to say, screw the plan. The plan and the thought of planning in the future means you're not focused on the present. So there's two things that we focus on in conversation a lot in our heads. One is the past. Oh my God, that happened. We try to analyze it. What happened? Root cause. How can we fix it? Right? So it's in the past. So that means your brain is not existing in the now moment, right? Me and you having a conversation, right? Just really being with you, Angela. That's now. The plan is a future thing, right? So that means our brain has now gone into the future. So again, it's not in the present. And so the one thing that I've really learned from going corporate into self-leadership is to forget the plan, screw the plan. And a lot of people will say, wake up. You want to do this in the morning, do this, plan, like, have this goal by end of day.
I can sense all the type A's in the room being like, what does she mean by that? So how about you break it down a little bit further for us? Because contextually, again, it'll make sense. It's not like you'll be like, oh yeah, like I have no plan for my business for the next like 3 years or 1 year or whatever. Maybe that's not what you mean, that's not what I sense. So can you, again, break it down for those who might take it very literally?
So if, let's say, you're building a podcast or building a coaching business or a blog, you want to write a book. You still have your 1-year goal that you need to meet. Write that out. And of course, spend some time, write the goal, maybe a monthly goal, weekly, whatever you want. But in a day, sometimes I'll just wake up and say, what do I feel like doing? And this is what I label highest excitement in the present moment. So there's two things that have to exist. If you're excited about something right now, and go do it. Right? Don't worry about how the plan's going to work out. You might have a goal by the end of day. So for example, I'm going to work on this one thing. It's going to be done by end of day. But how the day flows and goes, who cares? Right? If you want to go for a run, do it. Right? If you want to, of course, you have calls in between. That's fine. And I try to batch that so it's contained. But if I feel like doing a post for Chinese soup, I'll just go and film it. And I say, I don't want to work on that today. I'm going to work on my other projects. Right? So it's really following what's your highest excitement at that time.
What I love about this is it allows you to fully be present and enjoy the moments of life. And where I can see the counter argument for some folks is how productive am I going to be? Because it's like that vicious dilemma for entrepreneurs where you're trying to do everything and anything. Plus you wear other hats on top of that. So I would be curious for you, are there any like big stones that you put in place so that you're still productive, but still really be able to enjoy those moments of life?
The extreme end of the answer, and again, it's going to cause some discomfort, is no. Am I creating for the right reasons? So for example, I'll be very transparent about my life then right now. All my projects are not generating what I used to generate corporately as an income. Am I okay with that? Yes. I've planned enough money, to get me to a certain time and say, between that time, you know what? I'm going to create because I love creating. I'm not creating because I want to make money. Very two different energies about how things are flowing. This is a very extreme end where the planning, I've said, I'm going to feel uncomfortable. And there are moments where I worry and I cry about it because I'm like, damn it, right? Like the income's running out. Like I've only got this much savings. What now, right? And then I'll come back to say, no. Create because you love it. And so this is just me experimenting with my own life like this. And I think I have to go through this experience because I've been on the other side. So now I'm going to swing to this side and say, how is my life going to feel? How am I going to feel about myself, my own leadership without all the type A labels, without all the external expectations. So this is my own self-experiment that I'm doing right now. And I know it's very uncomfortable for some people. And I get challenged quite a bit about like the plans, what about your next goal? You're going to find a full-time job. What's going to happen? And you know what? That's the learning, is to let all that go and say, it doesn't.
I appreciate the vulnerability in you sharing that, because I can definitely relate. It's probably like less than 2 years ago now. I was in that journey where, like, by default, I was in a position where I had to either pick to go all in on what it is that I wanted to kind of create, like similar to what you said, or do I quickly go back into the corporate world, because that is what usually you're programmed to do.
Yeah.
And I remember I was like, you know what? If not now, then when? Because these breaks that we have in our life, they're privileges that aren't always going to be afforded to us. So when you have those moments, I think the energy that you create is even more powerful. And then the clarity that you gain is even crisper in whatever endeavor that you choose to go down after that time frame you've given yourself. It's going to attract something that is way better than what you potentially could have even fathomed. I'm not sure if you're starting to feel that, or you're still in that, like, holy shit, like, I'm still going back and forth kind of phase.
I go back and forth, but I think fundamentally is find the anchor. So you talk about your anchor and that what's driving you. And yes, it will disappear sometimes because life comes in and distracts you. But then go back to anchor. And like you said, it comes to you. And that's it. I just create. And little pieces come to me. And it won't be in the traditional sense of like a steady income that you can measure it, that it's expected, it's safe. That's the paradox of life. In every situation that we have, we just have to recognize that paradoxes exist in everything. And so whatever you choose, it's the right path for you. Just feel that. But yes, there will be contradictions to it of what you're feeling. But that's normal. Everything that we go down has paradox.
How about the paradoxes? Even I think about pain. You choose the type of pain. You choose a type of comfort or discomfort. But then it goes back to, like you said, the anchor. So I'm going to pivot a little bit towards the topic of growth and leadership. Usually it happens within the gray areas, even though the type A and the masculine energy is like, it's this or that. Rarely is life ever exactly like this or that. That's why it's challenging. So I'm curious for you, when you didn't have all the answers in the moment, especially with the work that you're doing right now and the research that you're doing, how do you effectively lead in those moments?
So I think when I don't have the answers, I might suggest that the answers are coming from a space that you don't expect. The answers are there, but sometimes when we think we don't have the answers, it's actually in here. But what if the answers were somewhere else, like your heart, your intuition, your whatever that happens to be? There's something that's going to drive you at some point, somewhere. We always have a true north and even when you don't know, it's because the head might be saying, well, we don't know in the traditional sense. And so when I don't think I have the answer up here in the normal sense, I just sit with it. And somehow it does show itself in a different way. And it's just trusting yourself that that way will come when it's ready. And so that's the first thing that's quite unique from being one control freak. And a lot of us are in that sense, because we want to control every aspect of our life, our career, our day. And control is an ego. And so just letting the ego go that I don't control things is okay. So that's the first thing. And then where it goes with my career and just like my projects right now. So essentially beyond the two projects you talked about, I do have the soup one as well. Again, I fall into the one that I feel like doing today. The soup ones are driving me. I'll do that. The research ones is always top of mind. And I'll just do it here and there a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I don't plan any of this. The answers just flow. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's how creativity happens and innovation happens, is when you actually can create space for that flow. Again, a lot of our conversation goes back to contextually what makes sense for that moment.
Correct.
So I'm going to focus a little bit on the data part right now. So 2 of your projects focus on leveraging data to really assess your thinking and, again, systematically train the power of words in conversations, etc. Based on the research that you've done and the coaching that you've done, can you talk about either a gap or an opportunity you've identified and how you're filling that with the work you're doing right now?
The biggest piece I think that's really I'm trying to shine a light on with the work is around self-awareness, but in how we speak. And so one of the big things is really just looking at conversations between people and I use this with leaders, is that can you see yourself in conversation? Often not, because you're just talking. So some of the really great observations about how you show up is the type of words you use. What kind of verbs are you using? If you use, one example I talked about is I should, you should. Should is actually a judgment word. So there's a lot of power behind the words. And we talked about this at the beginning, how words have power, right? How you use the words, how you use them on yourself have power. And so can you see how you're talking about yourself and to others? That's the first piece. The other piece that's really quite fascinating that I highlight to leaders is the type of questions that you ask. What's in the question? A lot of us do ask leading questions more than we realize, right? It's like, we should do that, shouldn't we? Or I should do that, rather than what's the best option? Like, so ask open-ended questions and it's a practice, it's a habit, and it's actually an intentional thing that we're not taught, unfortunately, as like a life skill. And so it's asking really open-ended, non-judgment questions. How and what are the best? Why is actually not, funny enough, a non-judgmental question. But yeah, those are the interesting things. And finally, one last piece that's quite interesting is how we make observations. So for example, I'll show a video or we'll see something and we'll already connect it right away to an assumption or a deduction without actually being an observation. So for example, we can see a little girl jumping and laughing. And I'll say, what do you see? And a lot of people say, oh, she's happy. Is happy the same as smiling? Does smiling mean she's happy? It's very simple, but the observation is she's smiling, not necessarily she's happy. They're different. So I do a lot of these exercises with people so that they can observe where their brain's gone to.
How often do we actually take the time to do that until we sit down and have like a coach like yourself walk us through that? I'm sure it's very enlightening. And for folks who really struggle with being in the gray and potentially present for those conversations, if you could offer maybe a question that they can consider for themselves, what would that question be?
What's behind the thinking? So if you make a statement, just pause and ask yourself, what's sitting behind that statement? What's sitting behind that question? And so when people ask me questions, I don't always answer them back. I'll ask them this question and say, oh, that's really curious. I love that question. What's behind it? And that kind of just turns it back around, but it gives me an understanding of who they are and what's happening.
You know, you're talking to a coach when they answer with a question. And it helps like deepen my awareness anytime I'm talking to them as well. So I'm going to switch gears to your book called Hello Me. It's a personal self-guided coach to yourself, your awareness, your understanding, your choices to ultimately create the life that you want. So if you could leave the audience with a food for thought or a question as a takeaway from that book, what would it be?
I'm going to go on a limb and actually throw this one out. On top of the one that I said is what is behind that thinking, the one that I'm still asking myself and that I do like for people to think about is, who am I? Do you know who you are? Do we actually know who we are? No title. If you could answer it with no title, no label, no role, we tend to fall into roles like I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, strip those. No job title, no achievements. What would you say?
It's freaking hard because I was gonna use a job title or like a coach or a podcaster, but I had daughter in there. So now I'm curious for you as we slowly wrap up our conversation. Who is Lisa?
I think I'm someone on a journey, and this might be applicable to a lot of people, and it's so broad. What makes me unique is that I'm someone on a journey who is living life rather than necessarily learning it. So learning is a theory-based thinking. We say we need to learn, but learning and living are different. We learn a lot of things in life. We learn and say, oh, I learned this. But how do you live it, I think, is a more genuine question. And so for me, that's where I am right now in my answer, is Lisa is just someone who's been through a lot of learning. It's great. But I think now what I want to do is actually live it. And that's where the now is relevant for me as Lisa right now.
Thank you for sharing that answer because it's not easy to articulate, especially when we're so used to saying, I am what my title is or whatever it may be. But when you wear so many different hats, how do you begin to narrow it down? And I don't know about you, but I've learned to get more comfortable with not just defaulting to one title, even though for most people, when you go to networking events or whatever it may be, it's easier for them to comprehend. But I think the goal of those conversations isn't even to have your title remembered. It's more so the impact. How can you help? Like all those different things that I think sometimes people forget about when connecting with another human being. And my last question to you is, what's one thing that's top of mind for you that we can either celebrate with you or that potentially the community can help you with?
The thing that I really want to celebrate is if I judge myself, then I let it. If I don't judge myself, then I let it. Because if I judge myself for judging, then I'm judging. Do you see how everything then becomes a cycle? Or if I'm angry at something, then I say, oh, I shouldn't be angry. And then I got angry at being angry. And so what we're trying to do is just sit with whatever it is. Even if I'm judging, then I'll let it judge 10 minutes and then move on. And so I think it's just letting go of me controlling what I think I should feel.
Through that, you'll probably develop more grace, because what I've heard is that the more grace you can actually give to yourself, the more grace you'll then extend to others. Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and your insights and for just being authentically you. I appreciate it. And to everyone else that's tuned into another episode, thank you for your time and attention. It means more to me than you'll know, and I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode.